I'm Chance Dorland, and this is The Docket, our weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio from expressnews.com, brought to you today by the law offices of Pat Maloney. And today, I'm joined now by a special guest, San Antonio Express News writer Bruce Selcraig, to discuss a different kind of story than what normally appears here on the Docket podcast. Monday, a troubled Bexar County Republican judge who resigned his post last month then had that resignation rejected, locking him into the November election ballot, did another about-face, and left the bench effective immediately. So a second resignation looks like this time it's going to stick. So Bruce, great to have you here on the program to discuss this very interesting topic. Let's start with some background on who John Fleming is.
Well, John Fleming is a county court at law judge, and that is a judge who hears they're smaller crimes, but they're certainly not unimportant. He hears a lot of DWI cases and lesser drug offenses. Many judges will say that's one of the critical posts in the courthouse because you often catch people before they become career criminals. Not so much the DWI cases, but the lesser drug offenses. So that's what he does. And he used to be a prosecutor in the DA's office under Susan Reed. And that's mainly who he is.
Now, Bruce, as I just mentioned a moment ago, this is Judge John Fleming's second resignation. Tell me about the first time and why that resignation wasn't accepted.
Well, it was a surprise to everyone because when he resigned, he left the Republican Party in this awkward position where they had about 48 hours. People may disagree on the interpretation of the law, but he had the party had about 48 hours to replace him. If they had accepted that resignation, they would have had 48 hours to replace him on the ballot, get his name off, and get a viable judicial candidate on the ballot for November 6th. And so that was an untenable position for the Republicans. And they essentially told him, we're going to reject your resignation, and we need you to get back on the ballot and commit yourself to serving out your term. And should you be reelected, we'll deal with that next year. So that's the genesis of what happened.
So that was the first time around. How did this more recent second resignation take place on Monday?
Well, this was equally surprising because he and the people close to him had told me that he was now committed to serving out his term this year and that he didn't want to be a judge next year, and he probably would not be reelected. And so it was looking very much like this would be a nice and tidy sort of lame duck acceptance of his defeat. And he resigns out of the blue. Just no warning. We just hear in the newsroom, he's resigned. I furiously call, 6 or 7 people and try to confirm it. And sure enough, he had. The motivations for this, depending on who you believe, he's going through what he describes as a messy divorce. And there's a lot of backstory to this, which we're not going to fully get into just because it's a divorce. And people often say things that maybe aren't quite fair or true. But the soon-to-be ex-wife says that the timing of the resignation was designed to hurt her and was done in spite. because of she is on the healthcare policy that he gets through the county. And her interpretation is that if he resigns rather than retires, then his healthcare stops and hers would also. And she describes herself as having a terminal illness, and that she has 3 children who are special needs children, and describes herself as indigent. And in the divorce case, she does not have an attorney. She is acting pro se in that case, she said to me. So some of that we haven't verified yet, but that's the personal situation that may have prompted the surprising second resignation. I can't really think of a logical explanation for why he would have done the about face to benefit himself. That doesn't seem to really be a viable idea.
From what you're aware of, Bruce, does this scenario that you just explained, involving healthcare for both him and the woman who he's in the middle of a divorce with, and also their children, does that seem likely that scenario for healthcare would actually be the case?
I think it's possible. There are entangled situations with families and dependents and stepkids and things like that in lots of marriages, and you could see how this might influence somebody if it's a very contentious divorce and lots of animosity. So that's not bizarre completely, but there's not enough evidence really to know whether that would be the case. The only other stated reasons that John Fleming has offered were things that other people sort of dismissed. He says his elderly parents who live near Wichita Falls are having health problems. And so that makes sense, but they've apparently had these health problems for some time, and he didn't express an urgent need to resolve them or to move to Wichita Falls to be closer to them. So some people suggest that got trotted out at the last moment. He says that he has health problems, that he has a heart condition, or at least a weakened heart of some sort. I'll take him at his word on that. But again, that was never used as an excuse during his many, many absences from the bench. That's what I probably should have led with that. In the journalism biz, we call that burying the lead. He has, according to county records, been absent from the bench in 2018 at least 46 times. That means 46 times for sick leave or medical reasons above and beyond the 21 days of vacation that they get and the absences for judicial conferences, that sort of thing. So 46 absences is remarkable. And if there's not an obvious stated reason, it's merely I'm sick today, or I have family concerns this week or something, that began to irritate some judges who have to arrange for visiting judges at taxpayer expense to fill in for him. So that's the underlying problem in this whole story, is this unusual number of absences beyond which any other judge has had. No other judge I spoke to could remember an instance like this.
You're listening to The Docket, a new weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio from expressnews.com, brought to you by our sponsor, the law offices of Pat Maloney. Online at expressnews.com, there's the story that you wrote about this second resignation that, of course, will have some details that might not come up in today's discussion here on the Docket podcast. One detail I do want to get to, though, reports of complaints and alcohol addiction. You just mentioned absences. Are these two items related?
Well, people suggest that they are. There is a girlfriend in this scenario, a woman by the name of Michelle Moore, and she very openly calls herself the girlfriend, called herself the fiancée for a while. And she says John does not have an alcohol problem. Then Judge Fleming told me directly in the only conversation we've had, he said, I do not have a problem with alcohol. But there are people all around him, from lawyer friends in the courthouse to other judges, to certainly his ex-wife, who states unequivocally in court documents that he is dependent upon alcohol. I have certainly not seen him in that condition, so I don't have personal knowledge of it. And we treaded lightly on that issue because it's certainly open to interpretation, but we don't take that lightly. We wouldn't even mention the allegation if we did not think there was substantial cause for that. A judge who is the administrative judge for the County Court at Law judges, John Longoria. Judge Longoria had such concerns about the absences that he reached out to Judge Fleming and suggested that he get some counseling through a legal group, through a group in the legal community, somewhat like an Alcoholics Anonymous, but just for judges and lawyers. So, and that's just one judge. Other judges have the same concern, but not all of them want to go public.
So, Bruce, I'm interested in what happens now. How does this affect the ballot? What happens now as this second resignation appears to be the final deal?
Well, his name will be on the ballot in November, and it is definitely a very down ballot race. And the people who actually read and understand what's going on in the courthouse are a tiny, tiny minority of those who vote. And those who vote are already a small minority of those who are eligible. So one presumes that there will be a lot of people who are just one-party voters, and they just figuratively pull the lever for one party. And then there are some, again, a small minority who will actually know what's going on in each race, and they will decide and go from party to party choosing judges because they actually have some background. So I don't know if that will really make a difference, and that's ignoring for a moment any discussion of the blue wave, anti-Trump sort of reaction that there may be. But he will nonetheless be on the ballot, going against a Democratic challenger, Helen Stowe. And the county commissioners are going to get to replace Judge Fleming in a few weeks. They've opened this up to entertain applications for anyone who would like to be considered, but they will actually appoint his replacement, and that person would serve until sometime in mid-January when all the new judges take their spot. So we can assume, since the Bexar County commissioners are, a majority of them are Democrats, we can assume that they will appoint a Democrat. And so there's a good chance this judgeship will flip next year to a Democrat.
And thanks to San Antonio Express News writer Bruce Selcraig for joining me for today's special episode of The Docket, our weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio and Bexar County from expressnews.com. Brought to you today by the law offices of Pat Maloney. For the San Antonio Express News, I'm Chance Dorland.